The Behringer Four LFO Eurorack module is a utility based on the open source firmware which is used in the Batumi Eurorack module. 4 faders provide manual control over the LFOs. 4 jacks or sockets provide plus and minus 5 volt CV control over the LFOs. The module provides 4 modes of operation. Note that fader 1 and socket 9 will control the frequency of LFO 1 in every mode. In free running mode, there are 4 independent LFOs. The faders control the frequency of each LFO, and the sockets 10 through 12 are CV inputs to modulate the frequency. In quad mode, you have quadrature LFOs. The LFOs 2, 3, and 4 are synced to LFO 1, but they are out of phase by 90 degrees. LFO 2 is 90 degrees out of phase, 3 is 180 degrees out of phase, and 4 is 270 degrees out of phase. Faders 2 through 4 control the level of the LFO outputs. Sockets 10, 11, and 12 control the level of the LFO outputs under CV control. Phase mode is much like quadrature mode, except rather than controlling the level of the output of the LFOs, you control the phase with the faders and with the sockets. So if we wanted to emulate quadrature mode, we would set 90 degrees out of phase, 180 degrees out of phase, and 270 degrees out of phase. And now you have quadrature LFOs, but you can manually control the phase of each LFO and also control it under CV control. In divide mode, LFOs 2 through 4 are divisions of LFO 1. Faders 2 through 4 control the frequency division, either divide by 2, divide by 3, divide by 4, 8, 16, 32. The sockets have the same control of the division under CV control. That concludes an overview of the modes. There are a number of rules regarding how the user interface controls will change function based on the mode. When trying to understand these rules, the Quick Start Guide is your friend. Check out pages 10 through 12 in that manual for a description of the rules associated with the different controls. See the description of this video for a link to the Quick Start Guide on the Behringer site. This video is not intended as a complete reference for these rules. It is an introduction to the module. We'll focus on musical applications of the Four LFO module. Let's look at some of these applications in each mode. We have the Four LFO. It's running in free running mode. You can see the frequency of LFO 1. That's the only one we're using initially. We're using LFO 1 to pitch modulate a subtractive voice. We have our oscillators, low-pass filter, VCA, and 2 envelope generators. We're driving it from the 960 sequencer, and it has a bell-like sound thanks to the ring modulator in this module. So we've got this LFO going into a VCA and coming out of the VCA and going into the pitch modulation for the VCOs. Let's listen to it without modulation first. Now we'll turn up the modulation manually. Next, we're going to use LFO 2 to modulate the VCA, and it will introduce the vibrato electronically. Let's listen. We're using LFO3 to modulate the filter cutoff. We'll enable it and start the sequence again. Let's use LFO4 to modulate the frequency of LFO1. So we've got it going out to this attenuator and then back into the LFO frequency modulation input. And you can see it changing frequency up here. So let's listen. We'll cut off the filter modulation. And now we'll reintroduce it. So there we have all 4 LFOs being used to modulate this bell sound patch that we have on the System 55. And we've got one other modification we want to make. We want the modulation of the VCA coming from LFO2. We want that synced to our 960. So we're going to take the step gate out from step 1 and we're going to plug that into the reset, and we have this switch set on reset, not sync. And let's listen. We'll turn off the filter modulation and we'll turn off the frequency change to LFO1. Here we go. And you can hear it consistently brings in the vibrato on step 2. Now let's add the frequency change. And add in the filter modulation. And so that's our demo of the 4 LFO free running mode. If you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks. I've got the 4 LFO in Quadrature Mode. I've got the 4 outputs going to a 4-channel oscilloscope. We'll look at that in a minute. You'll notice that the lights flash in turn. The frequency is the same for all of the LFOs. The frequency is controlled by this fader, and the output level for LFOs 2, 3, and 4 are controlled by these 3 faders. LFO1 is the master. LFO2 is 90 degrees delayed or out of phase with LFO1. LFO3 is 180 degrees out of phase. LFO4 is 270 degrees out of phase. Let's take a look at the oscilloscope so that we can visualize that relationship. This is LFO1. Note that I've set it up so that there are 4 sections with the grid in the background. So LFO1 is the master. LFO2 is 90 degrees out of phase with LFO1. This is 180 degrees. When LFO1 goes negative, LFO3 goes positive. And this is 270 degrees out of phase. And then we go to the next section of the graph and our master LFO starts over again. So that's the relationship of the 4 outputs in Quadrature Mode. Next, we'll use that functionality to actually do something musical. We have a patch set up so that we're taking the output of a VCO, routing each of the 4 waveforms into a voltage-controlled amplifier. The output of that amplifier goes into this mixer, and we're going to have LFO1 controlling this amplifier. We're going to repeat that for LFO2, LFO3, LFO4, and of course the four waveforms are sine wave, triangle wave, sawtooth wave, and square wave. So we're going to sequence from one to the next, similar to sequencing a wave table. Now let's take a look at that. We're going to use this assign output so that we can use the trapezoid waveform. So LFO1 goes to VCA1 control input, and we can hear it. LFO2 to the second one with the triangle waveform, sawtooth waveform, square waveform. And we could try some of the other assignable waveforms. That sounds pretty cool. So that's one application of the Quadrature LFO, using it effectively as four different envelopes to drive four VCAs with different audio content. I've mentioned that phase mode is like quadrature mode. Quadrature mode has 90 degrees of phase difference between each of the four LFOs. With phase mode, the degree of difference for LFOs 2, 3, and 4 can each vary between 0 and 360 degrees. We can manually set the phase with the faders. We can also modulate the phase with a CV. To demonstrate this, I've created a snare-like patch and a kick-like patch. I'm taking the square wave out for each of the four LFOs to use as gates. I'm using an Electribe 2 sampler and E2S to provide a clock. The 4 LFO is syncing to that clock using the sync mode with the E2S clock going into the reset sync jack for LFO1. The E2S also provides a hi-hat sound for an audible tempo. Let's take a listen, starting with the hi-hat and snare. I'm going to disable the third beat, the kick. And there's a syncopated beat 3 with the kick. And I'm going to add a modulation to the phase. So we've created a fairly sophisticated beat using these features of the 4 LFO in phase mode. I've switched to quadrature mode so that we can hear the difference between the straight quadrature beat and the syncopated beat that we came up with by changing the phase on LFO3. So let's listen to that. So that's the phase mode. I hope that gives you a feel for some of the things you can do with phase mode. It's particularly interesting what happens when you modulate the phase. It's difficult for me at this point to predict exactly what's going to happen, but it can be musical. We have the 4 LFO in division mode. In this mode, LFO1 controls the frequency of the master clock. The next 3 LFOs will be some division of that clock. The divisions will be either 2 or 3 or 4, 8, 16, or 32. At the moment, we've got the input to the reset/sync going into LFO2 in division mode, what that's going to do is cause the LFOs to pause, which is why you don't see or hear any activity on the LFOs right now. Finally, we have the outputs. We're using the square wave outputs. The first output will be an output going to clock the quantizer. The next three outputs will be added together in a mixer. The output will be quantized. If you look at the oscilloscope, the top line is the clock from LFO1, and the next line is the LFO2 output. Below that, we have the output from the quantizer. So let's go ahead and unpause and watch and hear what happens. So you can see the clock signals and the division by 2 and the output where we've summed all these outputs, and we've basically created a sequencer, and we get different patterns by changing the divisions. So that's the demonstration of division mode, where we've taken the outputs and summed them to create a repeating sequence of voltages, which of course you can hear in this voice right here. So that's a review of the 4 modes of the 4 LFO module from Behringer. It's quite an impressive module. It's so flexible, and you can never have enough LFOs. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.